Good morning. We would like to start this gathering by recognizing and honoring the Abenaki people. The Unitarian Church of Montpelier is located on Western Abenaki land, which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous people. We recognize and respect these peoples as traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we gather. In that same spirit, we will respect, protect, and be good stewards of this land for as long as we walk upon it. My name is Ginny Sassaman, and I extend a warm welcome to every one of you on this final day of February. Change is definitely in the air as we gather for worship this morning. You can just feel and smell nature getting ready for its annual ritual of packing away the snowstorms and throwing some warmer temperatures and mud our way. As always, we will continue gathering virtually, but no less lovingly. Thank you for joining us for this time of worship from wherever you are. The Unitarian Church of Montpelier is a Unitarian Universalist congregation founded in 1864. We are a liberal, progressive religious community that welcomes all as we journey together, seeking spiritual wholeness and justice in this world in which we live. I want to extend a special welcome this morning to any newcomers. We are so glad to have you here. And whoever you are, whether you're a newcomer, a longtime member, or anywhere in between, we are also glad to have you here as well. Again, a warm welcome to each and every one of you. And now, let us enter more deeply into our time of worship with the Prelude.
Good morning, everyone. I am the Reverend Joan Javier-Duval, minister of the Unitarian Church of Montpelier. And I share with you this morning these opening words by William Schulz. We affirm that every one of us is held in creation's hand, a part of the interdependent cosmic web, and hence strangers need not be enemies, that no one is saved until we all are saved, where all means the whole of creation. Come, let us worship together.
Our opening song is the earth, the water, the fire, the air. And I'm going to invite you, if you have an element of the earth or the water, maybe a sprig of green or a stone, to bring in that reminder of our connection to the elements. So I would invite you to find that right now. And it's a very simple chant. Some of you maybe know we'll be going over and over it several times. And I'd like to invite you all halfway through, I'll call this out, but to maybe unmute so that we can hear each other. It'll cause the sound to be a little funny, but I think it's worth it to hear our voices. So when I say that, feel free to unmute so we can hear the strength of our voices and our connection to the earth. I'm going to start with a heartbeat, and if you'd like to do that too, so we can feel grounded to the earth, to our hearts. The earth, the water, the fire, the air, return, 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 return. The earth, the water, the fire, the air, return, 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 return. The earth, the water, the fire, the air, return, 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 return. The earth, the water, the fire, the air, return, 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 return. The earth, the water, the fire, the air, return, feel free to unmute. The earth, the water, the fire, the air, return, return, return. The earth, the water, the fire, the air, return. The earth, the water, the fire, the air,
return, return.
earth,
The earth, the water, the fire, the air, return, 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 return. The earth, the water, the fire, the air, return, return.
The earth, the water,
The
the
water, the
fire,
fire,
the
the
air,
air,
return, return,
return,
return, return.
return.
The earth,
The
the
earth,
water,
the
the
water, the
fire, the
fire,
air,
the air,
return,
return,
return, return, return.
return,
The
return.
earth, the water, the fire, the air, return, return. Return, return, return.
And let us now light the chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. I invite you to join me in lighting a chalice or a candle at home if you have one nearby. We light this flame, enduring symbol of our commitment to lead with truth and compassion. And please join me now in saying these words of affirmation, which are adapted from the Universalist minister, L. Griswold Williams. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer, to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant.
So this morning, I brought soap and a towel with me to the Story for All Ages, which is going to be all about forest bathing. But actually, I don't need the soap And I probably don't need the towel either, because forest bathing doesn't really have anything to do with bathtubs. It's really about cleansing your spirit among the trees and plants and animals in the forest. This is something which started as a modern practice in Japan. They call it Shinrin Yoku. Shinrin Yoku. Shinrin means forest. Yoku means bath. The Japanese started forest bathing because they were worried about the health of their workers who spent too much time in the office. They decided workers needed to spend more time in nature. And it worked. Scientific research proved that this kind of deep nature experience really makes you healthier and happier. So I like science a lot, but that's not what I'm going to talk about right now. Instead, I'm going to share a forest bathing experience that I had myself. So this was 2 years ago in Costa Rica, which is very close to South America. And I expected a lush tropical experience like a jungle. But no, it was the end of the dry season. No rain for months. Everything was brown and very dry. There was hardly any water at all. Nature always has a way of surprising us. So we walked into the woods with a certified forest bathing guide. First, she had us practice gratitude for nature. And living in Vermont, that was very easy for me to do. But another woman told me that she lived in London and Tokyo, two very big cities. Mostly, she only experienced nature through a houseplant in her bedroom. So we're very fortunate here. Then we practiced awe. Our guide had us close our eyes, turn in a circle, open our eyes again, and imagine that whatever we saw when we opened our eyes was trying to communicate with us. I saw a bush with many tiny leaves, which all seemed to be talking to me. But I don't know what they were saying. I couldn't understand. The best part, though, was called Gifts of the Forest. Here's how that worked. Each of us had a partner. My partner sat on an old log with her eyes closed and her hands held out to receive gifts from me. So it was like this. So I looked around in this dry brown forest. What could I give her? And I can just imagine if we were all sitting together right now, both the kids and the grown-ups and everybody in between, you might imagine you're in the forest and you're looking around. And what gifts might you want to put into your partner's hands? So first, I would say probably not burdock. That might be a bad choice. Maybe milkweed. Milkweed is great. It helps keep butterflies alive. Maybe a delicate bunch of dried up blossoms, or a rock, like maybe a rock shaped like a heart, or a big piece of bark. So lots of choices. I don't actually remember the gifts that I gave her, except I did give her a twig with dried up berries. But I do know I gave her 5 gifts, and she held each one and examined them and smelled them and then said thank you. And she meant it. And then it was my turn to receive the gifts. It was a very profound experience. My favorite gift was a large leaf. It was dry too, but I felt it with my eyes closed. And I discovered that on one side of the leaf, it was scratchy, like sandpaper. But the other side was soft and fuzzy, like pussy willows in the spring. I felt so lucky. Someone just gave me a leaf that was scratchy on one side and fuzzy on the other. Life was good. And then we had a tea party. Our guide had brought tea, chocolate, and cookies into the forest with her. We sat together and shared our stories and how we all felt so much happier and healthier and connected to nature in general, especially this wonderful forest. And here's the best part. You don't have to go to Costa Rica. You can go forest bathing right in Montpelier in Hubbard Park, maybe with your family or a teacher, a guide. You too can feel happier and healthier and more connected to nature. You can also find amazing gifts of the forest. And maybe someday when we're all back in our church building together, you can show me or tell me what gifts you found. That might make you and me happier.
Our musical interlude this morning is Keepers of the Earth, which some of you may recognize that the congregation has sung before. It's written by Joyce Poley, who also wrote When Our Heart is in a Holy Place, which we sang recently. And I particularly love the watercolors in this. So Keepers of the Earth. I hope you enjoy it.
We are blessed by every river. sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots only close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
I have two readings to share with you this morning. The first is a short excerpt from the book Braiding, Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by the writer, scientist, and Professor Robin Wall Kimmerer. And this comes from the chapter, The Council of Pecans, which is about pecan trees. If one tree fruits, they all fruit. There are no soloists, not one tree in a grove, but the whole grove. Not one grove in the forest, but every grove, all across the county and all across the state. The trees act not as individuals, but somehow as a collective. Exactly how they do this, we don't yet know. But what we see is the power of unity. What happens to one happens to us all. We can starve together or feast together. All flourishing is mutual. Here ends the reading. And the second reading is the poem Cutting Greens by Lucille Clifton. Curling them around, I hold their bodies in obscene embrace, thinking of everything but kinship. Collards and kale strain against each strange other, away from my kiss-making hand and the iron bed pot. The pot is black. The cutting board is black. My hand, and just for a minute, the greens roll black under the knife, and the kitchen twists dark on its spine, and I taste in my natural appetite the bond of live things everywhere. On this final day of February, our final Sunday, exploring the theme of beloved community, I invite you to consider the question, what are the qualities of beloved community that you want to cultivate? What are the qualities of beloved community that we want to cultivate? I believe that at the heart of beloved community is a desire for the flourishing of life. Over the last few weeks in worship, we have explored how the flourishing of human life is hampered, particularly by the disconnection, indignity, and injustice caused by racism. And as we have lifted up in worship, knowing ourselves, facing history, and seeking repair are all part of addressing the wounds and the harms of racism within our human relations and communities. When I reflect on the theme of beloved community, I know too that the flourishing we desire is not just for ourselves. An all-encompassing notion of flourishing includes neighbor and stranger, human, kin, as well as all species of living things. All flourishing is mutual, Robin Wall Kimmerer states. In the chapter in her book entitled The Council of Pecans, Kimmerer interweaves the story of her family's forced migration over many generations from Wisconsin to Kansas to Oklahoma. She interweaves this with the story of the pecan tree. And this tree and its fruit is significant to Kimmerer's family as it dotted the landscape and provided nourishment when the family arrived on unfamiliar land. Instead of producing nuts a little at a time every year, pecan trees produce nuts in a process called massed fruiting. The trees in a given area either all have low production in a season, or they all have a boom in production, yielding an abundance of pecans, enough to make her grandfather's pockets swell, Kimmerer describes in her book. And it's not completely understood why or how pecan trees produce fruit in this way. There is evidence that trees communicate through pheromones, emitting scented chemical signals into the air. Scientists are also starting to understand more about tree communication through the mycorrhizal fungal network interlaced with their root systems. And there's evidence that through these networks, trees send chemical, hormonal, and slow pulsing electric signals to one another. We humans are just beginning to learn of the intelligence of trees and the ways they work in concert with one another to make life possible. If we observe closely, nature teaches us that all flourishing is mutual. The coronavirus pandemic has certainly taught us this as well. For nearly a year now, we have been living with an increased awareness of our interdependence, our very breath linking us to each other for good or for ill. Many people right here in this community and beyond have developed new systems of mutual aid and care, knowing that we need one another and that we need beloved community to survive. And as we continue to face the dire outcomes of the climate crisis and environmental degradation, we know more and more intimately how our fate and our flourishing is bound up with that of the earth and every other living thing that calls this planet home. It was good news, beyond good news, when President Biden committed the United States once again to the Paris Climate Agreement just shortly after he was inaugurated into office. And yet, a recent report from the United Nations shows that we as a global community are still far from implementing measures that are adequate enough to meet the necessary emission reduction goals. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that emissions must be reduced by about 45% by the year 2030 from 2010 levels to ensure that the average global temperature doesn't increase more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, a dangerous threshold for all life on the planet. And unfortunately, according to a United Nations report that was released on Friday, the combined efforts and reduction goals of those that have signed on to the climate agreement will so far only reduce emissions by less than 1% by the year 2030. And that is obviously a long way from that 45% reduction that's needed. The IPCC has warned that if the world fails to meet its target in the next 9 years, global warming will lead to irreversible loss of the most fragile ecosystems and crisis after crisis for the most vulnerable people and societies. The situation is dire for ourselves and for the planet. The truth that all flourishing is mutual is more important than ever. The kinship that we share with all living things must be a source of comfort and also motivation. The poet Diane Ackerman, who calls herself an earth ecstatic, describes her creed this way: all life is sacred, life loves life, and we are capable of improving our behavior toward one another. As basic as that is, for me, she says, It's also tonic and deeply spiritual, glorifying the smallest life form and embracing the most distant stars. She also writes, I believe we should regard all life forms with dignity, respect, affectionate curiosity, and the kind of protectiveness family members feel for one another. This protectiveness is born of a sense of kinship, a sense of mutuality and reciprocity, the belief that our flourishing is all tied together. And I'll share with you one example of how this protectiveness came through in the last couple of weeks. Earlier this month, a historic winter storm descended upon the state of Texas. The extremely cold temperatures and accompanying snow and ice, combined with inadequate energy infrastructure and an isolated, deregulated power grid, put millions of people on dire straits. And I know there are people in our own congregation with family in Texas who suffered through the power outages and lack of clean water. Communities of color and low-income communities that already experience discriminatory lack of access to resources have been especially vulnerable through the crisis, and the whole region is still recovering. Extreme weather is becoming a more regular occurrence globally as the climate crisis continues, and the impact on us and the natural world is in many cases devastating. As those Arctic temperatures descended on the usually warm region, concern grew for the sea turtles living in the Gulf of Mexico, just off the southern shore of Texas. The 5 species of sea turtle found in Texas are all considered threatened or endangered. And when water temperatures drop below about 50 degrees, turtles can experience what's called cold stun, a condition in which they remain awake but aren't able to move. Local environmental organizations sprung into action. Over the course of a few days, Sea Turtles Incorporated on South Padre Island and its volunteers had rescued nearly 4,500 sea turtles. The Texas State Aquarium in Corpus Christi rescued nearly 1,000 turtles. Now, and I was blown away by this fact. One of the turtles rescued was determined to be 150 years old and weighed about 400 pounds. Perhaps you saw some of the images of these turtles or read the news stories. If not, you can still imagine this scene. Thousands of turtles lined up shell to shell atop tarps and into makeshift bins and kiddie pools on the floor of a convention center. Now, last Sunday, more than 2,000 of the turtles were released back into the ocean, fully recovered. Sea Turtles Incorporated shared a video of the release, and you can hear the joy in the volunteers' voices as they bid farewell to the turtles. One can imagine the sweet and soothing relief of the warm waters enveloping those creatures once again. Rescue organizations continue to care for the remaining turtles with hopes of their full recovery and eventual return to the sea. In the poem I shared earlier, Lucille Clifton writes of the bond of live things everywhere. Another African-American poet, Gwendolyn Brooks, uses this same word, bond, when she writes, "We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond." This bond is incredibly compelling. This bond can move us, human beings, to set aside our own hardship and worries and dedicate a few hours to bringing cold, stunned turtles in from frigid waters. This bond draws us into the forest to bask in life, ancient and intelligent, and to receive its gifts. What else will the bond of live things everywhere move us to do for the sake of all? How will we live the lesson and the promise that all flourishing is mutual? The answers, dear ones, lie in each of our hearts and minds. May we discover and commit ourselves to those ways of living that make it so.
For the earth forever turning, for the skies for every sea, for our lives, for all we cherish, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the mountains, hills, and pastures in their silent majesty, for the stars, for all the heavens, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the sun, for rain and thunder, for the seasons' harmony, for our lives, for all creation, sing we our joyful praise to thee. For the world we raise our voices, for the home that gives us birth. In our joy we sing, returning home to our blue-green hills of earth.
And we close our service with these words from the Czechoslovakian writer and political leader, Vaclav Havel. We must divest ourselves of our egoistical anthropocentrism, our habit of seeing ourselves as masters of the universe who can do whatever occurs to us. We must discover a new respect for what transcends us, for the universe, for the earth, for nature, for life, and for reality. Our respect for other people, for other nations, and for other cultures can only grow from a humble respect for the cosmic order and from an awareness that we are a part of it. And we conclude our service now with the postlude, and I invite you to stay on the Zoom meeting afterwards to join in coffee hour.